I'm Dhyana Levey, and I'm going to be talking to you about using different forms of media to tell your story. So first, a little bit about me. I am a reporter who freelances for newspapers and magazines. I previously spent about 15 years in daily newspapers covering law, environment, and entertainment. And now I host and I produce the podcast Generation Cult, which some of you may have heard of. It is a podcast about people who are born and raised in cults, and I like to focus on what it was like to integrate into mainstream society once people got out. So it's an interview show. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, how I got to this place. And for the record, I'm not an expert on podcasts or media. I'm still learning, I'm always learning, but I just hope that by sharing my personal experience, giving some tips that I learned through trial and error might help inspire you if you want to do the same thing. So yeah, also I'm an SGA, a second generation adult. I was raised in a group that many would consider a cult, and I'll talk more about that later, so. And I'm really nervous, so please bear with me. Okay. All right, let me go to my next slide.
The page down, you got it.
I got it?
That way, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also new to PowerPoint presentations, so bear with me on that one too. So why should you share your story? Well, if you've had experience with a high demand group, cultic group, there's a lot to be gained, I think, both for the public, both for yourself, by sharing your experiences and observations if you want to. Sharing your story is not a requirement. You don't owe anyone an explanation. This is for somebody who is just looking for a way to express themselves. And this is for people who are looking to express themselves beyond the traditional publishing. And I love books, but the publishing industry is really hard. It's really hard to break into. So yeah, there's lots of other options, what with the internet and all. Okay, so why should you share what you know? Well, the public loves a good story, and people are intrigued by cults, and why wouldn't they be? They're scandalous, and there's lots of crazy stories, and sometimes there's murders and all sorts of scandalous things that people are just drawn to. They love it. People love drama. And one problem with that is that also helps a lot of misinformation get out there. People over-dramatize things, and so someone who's actually lived through it, who's been in a cult, who's experienced it, and can share their personal experience, I feel like they can educate people so much better. One thing is that people are attracted to these dramatic aspects, but one of the biggest things that people who've come out of cults have told me left them reeling is the psychological aspects of it. So that might not be as sexy as some of the other stuff, but I think it's really, really important, and we need good creative people to help educate people, in my opinion. So when I started my own project about cults, I thought I was just going to focus specifically on the one I was raised in, and I was going to write a book. I had no idea that I would end up producing a podcast and speaking at conferences. This is something totally unexpected for me, but I feel like I was really flexible with my project. I just kind of went where it took me, and so now here I am. A little bit about my cult, the one I was raised in. So I was raised in a cult. It did have some scandal and unpleasantness. It doesn't exist anymore in its current form, the group I was raised in, but it's very complicated. It originates with this woman here, H.P. Blavatsky. She started the Theosophical Society in 1875, and she was like a Russian aristocrat. She was known as a spirit medium, and she had this idea that all the world's religions kind of stemmed from this one deep wisdom, and she called that theosophy. So that's like at the most basic. There's so many more descriptions of it. I could talk for hours. And then after she died, a splinter group called the United Lodge of Theosophists broke off of that. And so the group I was raised in broke off of that. So it was like a splinter of a splinter of a splinter. So our group had a charismatic leader.
What was your group called?
It's the United Lodge of Theosophists.
Okay.
But I feel like when I talk about it, it's so specific to my area, which was in Southern California, because our group was very isolated from any other theosophist. Like we had our own, like there were about 100 of us, and we had like our own leader and practices, and I don't know, things got weird. People started suffering from sleep deprivation, doing all this work for our leader. He started having some mental health problems, and at a certain point during my childhood, people started leaving. So people I had known my whole life just up and disappeared. It broke into two factions, like people who still thought this man, Raghavan, was the great teacher, and then there were other people who said no. And then my family stayed in this like middle ground. We stayed on the commune. We didn't really follow Raghavan, but we were still involved. So it was all just really, really confusing for me, the whole situation. And so this is one of the articles that came out about my group when I was a little kid. I heard about it. I heard about these horrible articles. How could somebody do this, write about us? But I actually didn't see them till about 5 years ago when I started researching my group, and they became kind of like a lifeline to me to like some solid like information about how this group was perceived. But it was a huge deal when some of these articles started coming out, and I was just really embarrassed. Like I just didn't get this thing I was raised in. And so when I turned 18, I left my parents' house, and I kind of was just like, that didn't happen. Like, I don't even get it. I don't even want to deal with it. I just want to be a normal person. You know, I had some problems in my life. My sister was severely disabled. My mom, who was actually supportive of my goals, died. My dad wasn't supportive of my goals. So it was a real struggle to get through school, but I really wanted to be a reporter, and that's what I did, and I just didn't include any of this into that. But once my life kind of stabilized, you know, I'm a mom, I have a nice family, like I think just once things calmed down a bit, I started to really think, what was this bizarre thing I was raised in? My whole career is about collecting facts and finding out stuff, but I had this like weird mushy thing in my background I couldn't explain. And so I decided, okay, well, I'm gonna write a book. And so I started tracking down people I was raised with in the group, people who were adults, people I grew up with. A lot of them I'm still in touch with. And I started going and interviewing them. And I came into it with the best intentions. I didn't even really know what this thing called a cult was. Like, I didn't know the definition of it. I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll do research, and it was all just a misunderstanding. It really wasn't a cult, but you know, that took me to research cults in general, which is how I got involved with ICSA and met a lot of you. And I found my group really, I mean, it checked a lot of the boxes, the charismatic leader, the authoritarian aspects, just all the things. So I was pretty solid on what happened. So my intention was to write a story or memoir about growing up in the lodge, specific to my group's experience. But as I started to learn just more about cults as a topic and meet people who studied them, I became just more interested in how my group fit into the whole picture. And then while that was happening, I met all these other people from a range of different groups that were completely different than mine, who were raised in cults. And I started noticing all the similarities that we had, like certain struggles we had, and I thought, that's what I want to write about. This is it. And so I changed focus of my project, and I think things might have gone easier for me if I had just done a straight memoir, but this is what I wanted to do. I even wrote a proposal, approached a few agents, and they basically voiced my own concerns, which was like, what is this? Is this a memoir? Is this a nonfiction story? Like, what is it? What are you doing with this? It just didn't have focus, and I couldn't answer, and I guess I could have pushed it, but I didn't like what I had. It just wasn't working for me. So I got really, really depressed, and while I was bummed out, I started binging podcasts. That's me binging podcasts. So I binged lots of podcasts. I had already liked podcasts, but I just was really listening to them, and I loved the format and just everything about it. And there was one in particular that kind of inspired me to try to do my own, and that was a podcast called Heaven's Gate, It's about the group Heaven's Gate, the 39 people discovered in a mansion, and they had committed suicide thinking that they could get on a spaceship connected to Hale-Bopp. I mean, totally screwy stuff, but the reason I liked this podcast was it was done with such empathy. Like, they interviewed the families. Like, these were like real people, and I loved that. I was like, that's the kind of thing I want to do, just something that like really humanizes people. And so I thought, hey, you know, maybe I'll make a podcast. But I don't know how to make a podcast. I'm like, I don't know anything about audio equipment. I just didn't know anything about audio equipment, or I didn't know how to do it. So fortunately, I have some friends who work on radio and who even have podcasts. And so I just started bugging people, like, how do I do this? What do I need to learn? Like, is this even possible? What do you think? So that was like kind of where I started. And then I also took a class, just podcasting 101. Taught me some really great basics about audio equipment and Stitcher and SoundCloud, and like there's this podcasting hosting site called Libsyn, and I can use it. And so I learned a lot, both by bugging people, by taking a class, and now I have my first season of Generation Cult is out. I'm now working out of a studio in downtown Oakland. I recently threw a fundraiser, which is a total other skill that I don't know how to throw a fundraiser, but I did it. And now I have some money, and so now I have like a dedicated sound person helping me, and I feel like I've kind of gotten together some legitimacy. So my point here is that if I can do it, you can too. So yeah, my podcast isn't perfect. There's some sound issues, but it's been really, really rewarding. I've had people from all over contacting me saying, hey, I really relate to this. And then also on the flip side, people saying, I didn't know anything about people in cults. I had these weird views, and now I get it. And both of those things have been just really rewarding. Yeah, I'm talking about podcasting, but I mean, it doesn't have to be a podcast. There's so many options if you want to get your story out there. You could just start a blog. Just go to WordPress and start a blog. I mean, you could use social media. You could tweet your story out. I mean, there's just so many options. One option, this is Audad. I learned this program, it's terrible, but it's free. And I still work, anyone who knows anything about audio would probably turn their nose up about this, but again, it's what I learned on, and you can get to it for free and use it. So that was just an example of one of the things I learned. This is some of my first advice, just do it. Like, you need to just jump in and do it. If you're gonna tell your story, put together a creative project, just do it. Like, this is Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. I don't know, it's supposed to be inspiring. Just do it. All right. Okay, so this is a comic, somebody I just interviewed for my second season. He was raised in the Moonies, or the Unification Church, and he made a comic. I never would have thought to tell my story making a comic, but this is an example of something he did, talking about growing up in the Moonies, and it's interesting. If you want to see the whole comic, I have a printout I can show you, but this is basically it. So, you know, I know I'm being a little vague. I know I'm not saying all the specifics, but I guess it's just because there's just so many different ways you can express yourself beyond traditional publishing. So, anyway, all right. So I'm gonna share some tips that I learned. Things I've learned through trial and error. So I know I said just do it, just jump in. Well, I don't mean jump in without any preparation. I think the first part of jumping in means doing your research. And I think that start by thinking about your motivation. Why are you doing this? It's something I had screamed at me in public by another person I was raised with in my group who was very displeased that I was writing about our group. And it was a very, very unpleasant interaction, but I've kept that in my head ever since. Why am I doing this? Well, I had something in my background that I felt like I needed to understand, and I also thought I could make something good out of it, that people might get something out of, and that's my motivation, and I feel good about it, and it keeps me feeling good about it even when I have problems with the project or somebody questions me or doesn't like it. You know, so if that's your motivation, if you want to put something out to the public that might help them, that's great. That's a great reason. If your intention is to make money and piss people off, that's probably not the best way to go. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what you should be doing or not, but
It can be quite a good way to piss
yeah.
people off.
Oh, definitely. I'm just saying, like, for me personally, if that was my intention going through it, like, I just want to piss people off. I just feel like it'd be harder to defend, or, you know, I don't know. But
sadly, there's a lot of that out there. That's what I'm saying. A
Yeah.
lot of people are active because they're upset, because they haven't recovered from their experience, and they want to upset other people. And that's
Yeah.
not simply members of so-called cults. That's ex-members,
Yes.
you know, and members of the general public who like to. You know, that's just the way they are.
Yeah.
So it's quite a good way of pissing people off.
No, it's a great way to
Would
piss
that we
people
could
off.
do something about that?
No, it's a great way. I just feel like if that was my only reasoning for doing this, I would have a hard time keeping going with it. Just feeling good about
Thankfully.
it personally. Yeah. So think about your motivation. Talk to people who are doing what you want to do. Don't fear the unknown. I know it's easier said than done, but I mean, I bugged so many people, and most of the time people are really flattered because people love talking about themselves. Maybe one person didn't have time for me and was like, well, whatever, I'll just go talk to this other person. So yeah, find out what works. Find out what's out there. You know, you hearing it from someone who's actually produced a podcast or a documentary or has a successful blog. Like, you can get just so much information just from pulling it out of people who have already done it. Take a class. I took a class. You know, in the United States, we have community colleges, adult education. You can learn audio, you can learn documentary film, you can learn whatever. There's classes on everything. There's nonprofits. I went through a really great organization in San Francisco called the Writers Grotto, and it has already successful authors and podcasters and filmmakers, and they actually have classes for people. And I mean, I learned so much. Like, there's always something to learn when you're trying something new. And then entrench yourself in the medium you want to use. Just like binge it. Like, don't operate in a bubble. Know what else is out there. There are tons of podcasts about cults. There's one called Cults, and it's meticulously produced. It takes a deep dive into cults. It sounds better than mine, like, as far as the audio quality. However, it really, really plays up like the murder and abuse and intrigue. And so while I got something out of listening to it, I thought, well, that's not really the direction I want to go with mine. And then on the flip side, there's another one called We're Starting a Cult, and it's by two comedians. I think it's hilarious, but other people might not think it's hilarious. I mean, basically, the premise of the show is every day they talk about the cult they're going to start, and it's parody and it's funny, but I could see someone not, liking it. So I liked it. I thought it was funny. And then I talked about Heaven's Gate, which is what really inspired me, and that was because of the empathy angle. So just see what's out there. Chances are, like, what you're doing isn't totally unique, and that's fine. You can see what's there, what works for people, what doesn't. So yeah. And then once your project is in the works, don't let mistakes or rejection hold you up. Again, I know that's easier said than done, but just accept that, like, you're gonna make mistakes and someone's gonna reject you. That's just how it works. I make mistakes constantly. I have spent days editing something, and then I lost it all because I did something weird to it. But you know what, the next time I worked on it, I learned where and when to save. And then when I messed up again, because I'll always mess up again, I was able to, like, not have to start from the very beginning. So just don't be scared of making mistakes, jump in. And then rejection, I'm the queen of rejection. I can't even count how many things I've been rejected from. When I first was getting into newspaper reporting, it took me forever to get my first job, but I just kept at it. And, like, for this podcast, I recently applied for a big grant and they told me no. And it's like, well, I guess I'll just host a fundraiser. I mean, there's just, it sucks. It doesn't feel good. I don't like making mistakes or being rejected, but just don't let the fear of it stop you. I actually had a successful podcaster tell me that all of her rejections she keeps as like a badge of honor because it means she's actually doing something. And I think that's like a little too optimistic for me, but it's kind of a nice way to be like, oh, I guess that's one way to look at it. Okay, and then this one is so important. Have someone else go over your work. If you think it's perfect, you're wrong. Like, there's gonna be things you missed. So just having, before, like you have your podcast episode or your big blog post or whatever, and you're gonna put it out to the public, just like stop, have someone you trust look at it, hire someone to look at it. They will catch things that you don't catch. It's just the way it is. I can relate to that with my job experience. I mean, I'm used to having my stories just like chopped to pieces, and usually it's for the better, usually. And then also, the whole world isn't in your head, so you might write something or say something or record something and think it comes off a certain way, but someone else might take it another way, and you might have not even considered that. So it's really, really good to prepare for that type of thing. Another podcaster and author, now he's an author, told me that like he always keeps Facebook trolls in his head. Like whenever he does something, he's like, what are they all gonna say? And I'm not saying being paranoid, be paranoid, but it's just kind of good. Like, think about how people are gonna perceive it, get feedback. And then my last point is be flexible. My project didn't go where I thought it was gonna go. I didn't think I would do a podcast and speak at conferences. Like, I just didn't think that would ever happen, but I was open to change. It was really hard when I didn't feel like it was gonna work out as a book, but putting it aside and finding something else really worked for me. And I'm not saying this is never gonna be a book and I might get it together and do a book, or it might not be meant to be a book, but like, just stay flexible and open, and you might be able to create something really, really good. Oh, another thing is that if you don't feel ready to do your own project, getting involved in someone else's project can be really helpful. I actually have some problems talking about my group, even though I have a podcast. I get really nervous. I can see everybody like looking at me with disappointment, and it kind of holds me up, like I have a lot of guilt. And so for whatever reason, doing a podcast with other people's stories and kind of weaving mine in felt better. I came on someone else's podcast, and I like to direct people to that episode. I'm like, you want to hear more about my stuff? Just listen. I was interviewed by a therapist. That's what it took to get all the information out about me. Like, listen to that. So yeah, even if you're not ready, like get involved with someone else's project. It can be less intimidating. So I am going to just leave you with this. I'm working on my second season now. I'm still looking for people to interview. If you have any ideas, reach out to me. There's an email address. Check things out on the website, generationcult.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Thank you so much for listening. Any questions?